Hello everyone, welcome to Husker Hemisphere. I'm here with Chancellor Green and the rest of a few members of MSAC. Chancellor, I just want to start with asking you basically this past year has been extremely eventful, and really what have you learned and taken in from the things that have been happening around our country?
Well, the year's been eventful in a lot of ways, right? I actually refer to, really this time a year ago to now, so the last 12, 13 months, as the year of the dueling pandemics. Certainly the whole COVID thing that we're living through, and to be able to talk to you without a mask 6 feet away is great, but that's one big pandemic we've had. But we've also had the pandemic of racial inequity. And the whole understanding, I think, at a different level than I've seen in my lifetime. So I'll be 60 this year, to put that in context for you. In my lifetime, I have never seen the reckoning or remember this kind of reckoning around racial inequity that was really exposed and brought to bear with the whole loss of George Floyd and others last spring, summer, through the summer, and just the tragedy of that, right? So for me, it's been a real year of learning there, and really for the first time understanding the depth of that issue and understanding the depth of it not only at a national social scale, a U.S. conversation, an American conversation, but locally as a Nebraska conversation, locally as a University of Nebraska-Lincoln conversation. So it's been a real year of learning and understanding on that front for me personally.
So MSAC created a list of demands, and we sent them to Bill Moose and some of the upper staff at the athletic department. How do you want to move forward with that, and what do you think you'll help to change with that?
Yeah, so first of all, I know all three of you are a part of the MSAC, of the Minority Student Athlete Collective, and that effort that was formed last year. I applaud you for that, number one, for stepping up and having that voice. And initially with the kind of list of things that you really felt needed attention in Husker athletics, specifically at the university. So I applaud you for that first and foremost. Last summer, we actually went through a period of time where we received a lot of those kinds of communications. So for me as the chancellor of the institution, in addition to what I saw MSAC do with Husker athletics, more focused on Husker athletics, I had communications from the Black Student Union. I had communications from the African and African American Faculty Caucus of the university, from the African and African American Studies group of the university, from the Institute for Ethnic Studies in the College of Arts and Sciences, from the Chancellor's Commission on the Status of People of Color. So you get the idea here from really a wide, broad group that were expressing, I'll call it pent up, long-time concerns at the university around racial equity in particular, right? We have gone through a process of looking at each of those concerns this morning. In fact, I was with our senior leadership team. We meet every Monday morning for 3 hours in working through a lot of issues with the university. It just so happened that this morning we were at the point where we're reviewing a strategy document associated with those. There's 43 items on that strategy document that came out of all of those kinds of concerns. Demands might not be the right word, but I think you know what I mean, really demanding look at these concerns institutionally at UNL. Everything related to how do you make sure that for a student of color, for example, that there is a feeling that you belong here, that there is not a different barrier for you here, or that the experience that you have at the University of Nebraska is not different because of your background or your race, right? To faculty hiring, to faculty retention for faculty of color and faculty scholars of color, to police policing and the police, you get the whole breadth of things that were in those strategies. So we have been looking at and are working to respond to those strategically, right? In thinking about how we move toward a more anti-racist, racial equity campus and institution over time, right? You probably are aware of the journey on anti-racism and racial equity that we set up last summer, where I asked 6 of our faculty who represent people of color to talk to us and help us think about what a journey for anti-racism and racial equity should look like. They have been working with us around all of those 43 things. So I would love to sit here and kind of show you those 43. They're exciting things that we're working on. Many of those are things that, like I think MSAC has understood in the conversation with Husker athletics, are things that will take years to get to the destinations. Why we called it a journey, right? It's not something that we're going to get to tomorrow or this year or next year, but it's a journey that we will be on over time to get there. That's how I think we respond. Does that make sense? So I'm really encouraged that we are talking about things that we have never talked about before. I remember, you may remember, you're a senior, you may remember back to this period of time since you've been at Nebraska. I remember back to 2014 to 2015, right? That might be about the time you got here, when we were talking about some of these same kinds of concerns, right? Coming out of the Ferguson, Missouri issues, coming out of the things that happened in that period of time, the first BLM rallies here, that said, why do we not have course requirements on understanding racial issues and really understanding what's underneath those racial issues? That was still sitting on a shelf today. I'm not proud of that it's still sitting on a shelf. That's in this list, right, of things that we're coming back to, thinking about how we're going to institute those for all of our students, for all of our faculty. So time, attention, accountability to these issues, understanding really what they are. The thing you asked me in the first question earlier about learning this past year, what's that felt like or looked like for me as the leader of the institution. This last summer was the first time that I really got the picture of what people were saying to me, had been saying to me, about what it's like to be a person of color on our campus, what it's like to be a person of color in Lincoln, Nebraska, what it's like to have the structural barriers that are in place. It's the first time I really understood it, that I really got it from listening to those groups and listening to those groups talk about what those issues look like. When you guys had the rally out here, I remember that really, really well, because it happened to be the night that the Big Ten board was going to meet to determine whether we reopened football season or not. So I remember how you got, there was the whole lineup of the speakers, right? And you were one of them. I think I didn't get to hear you because I had to leave. But I got through the first half of the speakers. I got to hear Amy Williams and the next person, and I had to bolt to the meeting to vote on the Big Ten. It took guts to do that, candidly. To me, it took guts to do that. When I sat and I listened to those stories, those are the kinds of stories that I was hearing all summer long. And I was hearing from our students, that I was hearing from our faculty, that I was hearing from spouses of our faculty, from family members of our faculty and students, of things they had experienced here. Not specifically always on the campus, but here, that they had experienced. And that penetrated to me in a way that I had not, honestly, I had not felt that before, because it had been really easy, maybe too easy for me to say, that doesn't affect me and I'm not really sure that happens. But I heard it over and over and over again in ways that were real and that stories that people were telling me, because I know I've kind of combined you two's questions, but it's going to take time, and we need to respond to those issues thoughtfully. We need to respond to them with actions that move the needle and move the ball, and that's what we're doing now in this process.
Exactly. I think the university is so big in the Lincoln community that it definitely will have a big influence changing the whole community,
Right. And that's, I'll give you a little bit of context. I've said this in other public settings a lot the last few months. We did a deal last week where we had 500 people on around a conversation on inclusive leadership with some people from outside the university actually who joined us for it. But when I say that was the first time that I really understood it thoroughly, so I'll tell you a little bit about my background, right? And this will maybe help you understand what I mean by that. I grew up in Virginia. I grew up in the South, essentially. My first grade year in elementary school, I remember distinctly really well because it was the first year my county schools were desegregated in the Civil Rights era in 1967. So I remember that. It's marked in my memory. It's marked in the way things were and why they were that way, and the way the environment that I was brought up in, that I understood, right? That we all are brought up in our environment that we understand, that we can relate to. And when I hearkened back to and I thought about that context for what was happening then and what was happening now, right, in 2021, all these years later, that we were at the same point of talking about so many of the same things that we were talking about in 1967 under different contexts. How have we managed to end up in the same place? Do you understand the context, right? And so when I was listening to those stories this summer, it was, wow, I feel like I'm in 1967. And how could that possibly be that when I was 6 years old, 54 years ago, that we'd be having these same conversations under different consequences, really different consequences in 2021? How could that be?
A way that we can answer that question is the complacency, especially from a lot of different minority groups, in trying to just stop struggling and to fit in, is to not be a burden to society and like airing their grievances every time they have one. I was talking to a friend yesterday, and I was like, a lot of professions we're being taken advantage of as workers, regardless of your minority or race or background or whatever. And he was like, yeah, but that's what I have to do to provide for my family. And it's kind of the same kind of context where it's like we do what we have to do to provide for our families, and so the changes that we want take a lot of work and a lot of time, but you can't feed your family protesting all the time. And so it's not that we don't care about progressing, but it's like you kind of have to pick your battles, and sometimes your battle's not going to be picked in 10 years. What does diversity, inclusion, and equity mean to you, and why do you think heads of universities should value it?
Well, we talk about it in terms of inclusive excellence, so rolling all of that together, diversity, inclusion, equity, all into one thing that we refer to as inclusive excellence. What it means is that we value and we are all in this together in the same way. We're all equal in that. We all treat one another equally. We're all in this journey together, right? So that's what it is, right, first of all. But, how do we get there is a different question, right? So we, if you take Nebraska, for example, we can talk about how well the university represents the state of Nebraska, or we can talk about how well the university represents greater than the state of Nebraska in terms of how we are made up, who we are, how welcoming we are to everyone at the university. Does that make sense? You can look at it in all of those contexts. And we've got work to do in some areas. We're making really, really good progress in some areas. We're really lagging in other areas that we've got a lot of catch up to really do to be at a point where we would represent the diversity of our population, even in the state of Nebraska, for example. So it's where everyone is welcome, where all ideas are welcome, where all people are welcome, where there's no equity differences between, no matter what, the person's identity is, whether it's race, whether it's gender, whether it's, sexual identity, whether you religious preference, ethnic background, across the board.
As a school where we are consistently kind of one of the, on the lower end of things such as like diversity, inclusion, or just having a diverse population, what is like kind of our goal to where we can kind of bridge the gap and make that better, make that not be last?
Yeah, so a minute ago when I was answering a previous question, I talked about how there's some areas where we are doing well, where if I was measuring us, right, that's not the right way to say it, but you get what I mean, if we were measuring our progress, we would be right where we should be, or close to, or right where we should be. There are other areas where we lag, where we really lag. For example, if you look at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln as a microcosm of the state of Nebraska, so thinking of the University of Nebraska as the people's university of the state of Nebraska, we talk about that all the time. We're the big public university, flagship land-grant university for our state. And you look at us demographically for our student body, right? So if I look at our undergraduate student body, I look at our incoming freshman class, so take this last year's freshman class that came in fall of 2020, it looks pretty good. So if you look at the demographic makeup of the identity of people in Nebraska, and you look at the percentage of Nebraskans who are African American or Black, you look at the percentage of Nebraskans who are Hispanic origin, or Native or Indigenous origin, or Pacific Islander orientation, you get the picture. We do pretty well. Our freshman class actually represented that population really, really well. We were 20% underrepresented minorities in our freshman class, first time ever in our history that was the case. And demographically, it matched Nebraska's numbers pretty well, hand in hand. That was our freshman class. You look at our overall undergraduate population, we lag. We have about half as many African American students, Black students here as our state would have in terms of demographics. We have about half as many Hispanic students overall in our undergraduate population as our state population would reflect. There's some lag there, but that freshman class number gives me really great hope, right? That's the progress piece. Where we really lag is in faculty. So if you look at our faculty numbers and you look at that demographic representation on faculty, we've got a lot of work to do to be at a point where we would represent Nebraska. Now, you're all from California or from Michigan. The demographic in Michigan and California is different yet than Nebraska's demographic is. We're a long way from the representativeness of either of those environments. But from a Nebraska perspective, you get my picture on the students. Faculty-wise, we have far too few African American faculty, Black African American faculty here. We need to work on that. That's one of those 43 things that I mentioned earlier, where we really need to put emphasis on hiring talented African American and Hispanic and Asian faculty here. Absolutely, we need to do that. And Native faculty here, we're really low on our number of Native faculty. We need to even further work on retaining those faculty. It's not just getting them here, it's retaining them here. We lose good talent that go elsewhere because they don't see themselves here, right? Or they don't feel like they see themselves in a way that sustains them here. So that's an area that we're really working to think about how we go about reducing that gap and getting to the point where we really feel like that we are representing and that we're not at the bottom of the Big Ten. Does that make sense? I know the Minority Student Athlete Collective had that as one of your questions, right, relative to Husker athletics. as well. And I know there's been some work in that area, and will continue to need to be work in that area as well.
So with the current rise in Asian attacks, what has the university done to create a safe environment for Asian people to feel safer?
Yeah, I'm sure we all kind of can reel the tape back to a year ago with the start of COVID and the origination of the virus in China. The speculation, was this going to mean anything? What's it going to mean for the U.S.? Then it hits here and things really happen worldwide. The bias that was built into that because of the origination of coronavirus in China and then the attention that received, we began hearing about that from our students last March and April. Particularly our Chinese students on campus, which are a significant percentage of our student population, comes from the Pacific Rim, in particular mainland China. And we began hearing from some of our students about, well, I feel a little bit unsafe, or I feel like there are things being said about me, or I just don't feel comfortable with what is happening around me, and what can I do about that, right? So our global engagement folks, the folks who work with all of our international students on campus, really started networking, particularly with our international students from the Pacific Rim, to help them be able to deal with that and provide a sense of security for them and safety for them, particularly given that many of them couldn't go home, right? So when we shut down the university last March and we went to fully remote, many of those students stayed here. They couldn't go home. So we kept them here, helped them to maintain that sense of community through the pandemic. So that's one thread of the things that we have done. We've also tried to be engaging with our student population to let them know where resources are to help them if they are feeling pressured because of the, for lack of a better way of putting it, people blaming them or putting that on them around COVID, inappropriately so, and feeling that kind of discrimination or bias that might have come as a result. The latest incident, the shootings in Atlanta, and the attention, of course, that's receiving nationally around whether there was a racial bias in that set of shootings, and the loss of life associated with it has raised that again to a level of what do we do about this? It has, kind of a similar feel in some ways to last summer, right? In a different way, but in a similar kind of feeling of racial bias. So we again are reaching out to our Asian students, trying to make sure they are aware of resources that we can help them if they're feeling pressured or they're feeling anxiety, particularly associated with those events, to provide a kind of safety net, a sense of security and safety net, and obviously condemning, that violence and the hatred behind it. So all three of you, did you become involved with the MSAC as it was formed last summer? Did you all three kind of get engaged from the beginning with it? Talk to me a little bit about that, what that meant to you, why you became involved, or how it. Now I've actually read a little bit about yours, so I kind of have a sense of some of the things you have thought, and that please can talk about it. But
so I first found out about MSAC after hearing about George Floyd and just the protests, and on top of COVID, I was kind of struggling deciding if I should protest, and that felt unsafe to me just because I didn't want to get COVID, I didn't want to get hurt, and I just felt really stuck. So I reached out to Dewan, and we just had a really good talk actually, and it was kind of the first person who I reached out to because a lot of people in my team just could never share that experience, and he said, here's a group of people who will definitely know exactly how you're feeling and also want to change and can help you make big improvements within your community, within the athletic department. And I thought it was the perfect opportunity because now I feel like I'm actually making the steps and movements and change that I want to, you know?
For me, it was kind of like I think Sadio Finner, he's a track runner, he reached out to me over the summer because it was just like a lot of us were, before we were even like together as a group, we was just people who were like, you'd see on social media, this person's speaking out about something, this person has something to say about this, you know? And so it was kind of like a group where we all saw each other as like, dang, well, these are people who are my age who have a voice and aren't afraid to use it, you know, who want to stand up. And so it kind of came a thing like that. And then Sadio reached out to me and then I joined the group and I'm like, wow, like, you know, now I'm a part of a group of some people who are like-minded, very strong, smart people who are willing to fight for the things that they believe in.
Mm-hmm. So it really was grassroots from the beginning. So students just ended up networking, you know, eventually developed a network and said, why don't we? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, like my teammates are very, very vocal when it comes to politics. I'm very vocal on social media. Sadio knows that. We've had a lot of conversations even last December, or like 2019 December, we've had conversations regarding race. We've always been talking about that and how it's, you know, sometimes difficult being on teams where, you know, you have teammates who are from small towns who haven't gone to high school with a single minority and don't know technically what can be offensive language and how to avoid that offensive language. So it kind of hits you hard and it's hard kind of how to deal with it. So, I mean, I think the track team and people on the track team does a great job, you know, picking each other up and holding each other up, and that's how I think I got involved in it. But yeah, I've always been reposting. I'm always somebody who you can find a resource on my social media. You can find, you know, a tweet or an Instagram post or a Facebook post from me regarding what's happening in the world, but also being a political science major too and understanding governments and social and just society in general. I'm very interested in how the world works and how it's going to turn and how it's going to improve and continue to operate the way that it does. So that's just how, like, why I'm in it, I guess I would say.
So tell me about, so I know about the initial letter, right? And that I saw that, read that along with everyone else, and then the rally in September, I guess it was. So talk to me about what the collective is doing now. So there was those two steps were very kind of visible public steps, and I know you've met with Bill and the leadership and so forth. But what are you doing now?
So what we've done in the past couple of months is just reach out to minority students and give them opportunities for scholarships and to speak out and to connect themselves in the community, whether they want to do law school, medical school, how they want to be involved. So that's kind of what we've been focusing on. But I kind of want to be more socially visible and on social media and be socially active, just because you can reach more people then. But no, we've just been really contacting other minority students and seeing if they're okay, and if they need to reach out to any of our mental health services that athletics provides. So basically that's just step number one, making sure that everybody's not, you know, emotionally damaged by anything that's happening.
Yeah, exactly. I think one thing we're doing is we broke up the MSAC group into two different groups. One group that's really focusing on exact changes we can make and bring up to Bill Moose and any athletic staff that needs to be changed, working heavily within the athletic department. And then we also have an outreach program, which anybody who is in the athletic department, anybody from the students can join it and kind of reach elementary schools. We're telling stories, like Taylor said, so yeah.
Those are really important conversations. And we can't go down this journey and make progress against all of those things unless we really are willing to have those conversations and to really listen. So thanks for doing it.
Thank you, Chancellor, for taking the time to speak with MSAC, and thank you all for watching Husker Hemisphere.